Here's one person's experience being autistic.
Hello, my name is Jennifer Woodruff Tait. I am 52 years old. I was diagnosed officially with ASD level 1, which is known as high functioning autism. I prefer autism with low support needs when I was 49, but I probably self diagnosed myself 20 years before that. When I was in my 20s, I read a book about what was then referred to as Asperger's disease, and I brought it to my mother, who I now believe was probably level 2, medium support need autistic. And she said, "Oh, you can't be autistic. You can't have Asperger's because I experience all these same things and I'm not autistic." Well, I believe now that she was, but this sort of sat in the back of my head for a while. And then when I was in my late 40s, my older child went through the process of diagnosis. And we were having a meeting where the psychologist was asking questions about my child. And I thought, gosh, I can answer all these questions myself. So I asked the child psychologist who was diagnosing my older child to recommend somebody who would do an adult diagnosis. It was actually pretty easy for me to get a diagnosis, but I've found that it's been harder for other people later. This was early during the pandemic. We did it over Zoom. Of course, I didn't have a very long wait list. I think in just the last few years, there's really been an explosion in diagnoses, people trying to access diagnoses. And so the same person now has like a 5-year wait list. But anyway, one of the hardest parts for people who want to be officially diagnosed is finding someone and getting on a waiting list for someone who would diagnose adult autistics. There aren't that many people still that will do that. Once I talked to the psychologist, the actual process was not that difficult. She had me fill out several assessments. We had 2 interviews where she talked through various things. And then we had a third meeting. I think when we had the meetings, the first 2, she was working through assessments on her end, answering questions. And then the third meeting, she presented to me what she had written up. And she said, sort of, does this accurately represent our discussions? Do you want to make sure I understood what was going on? And we also talked a little bit about putting specific things into what she was writing about accommodations that I might want to ask for, particularly accommodations in medical settings. So she wrote those down as suggestions. So, for instance, to go to my doctor for certain things that I find difficult in a medical setting. So what characteristics of mine that people notice? Well, I stare at the ceiling a lot. I'm doing it right now. Over the years, I've become a pretty good masker in terms of masking, autistic masking, which is a whole other subject. So I think I have a lot of characteristics of being autistic that people just don't notice. People know that I have a PhD and I read a lot of books. So I think, oh, Jennifer's just weird because she's, an intellectual. That's true, but it's also true that people sometimes notice that I have special interests, that I get really invested in things. But I think that a lot of times people don't really notice unless I tell them, because I masked very heavily. So I was in my late 40s and got diagnosed. And so a lot of times in public, I'm thinking, like even right now, sitting in my office, I'm thinking about the temperature, how my clothes feel, the way my voice is coming out of my mouth, by making eye contact, the words I'm using. And the sensory input from the setting around me is utterly overwhelming at every moment. A lot of people aren't aware that that's going on unless I tell them. People are like, wait, aren't you just listening to what I'm saying? And I'm like, well, there's a TV on in the corner. And they say, yeah, just block it out. And no, I can't do that. I think a lot of people's concept of autism is still Rain Man. And they don't think that autistic people are women. And there's still actually not a lot of research on what autism looks like in women. And then people say, you hold down a job, you have degrees, you're married, you have children. Autistic people can't do those things. It can be challenging to do those things, but I am autistic and I do those things. So a lot of times people don't think I'm autistic because I'm working really, really hard for them not to think that. I've gotten much better after getting my official diagnosis. It's just saying, look, I'm autistic, and that means I need these accommodations, and I'm going to be this way as we relate to each other. One of the strengths, I think, of my autism, maybe the best way to put it, is pattern recognition. Autistic people in general are really good at pattern recognition. And so and walk into a situation, I get vibes from the situation because I'm subconsciously recognizing patterns. And I'll be like, yeah, you shouldn't trust this person. And then other people say, that person's perfectly fine. And then later, if they find out, we shouldn't have trusted that person. So I pick up on that sort of thing a lot in a situation and almost sort of prophetically. My mother used to do this. She knew when people were going to write her back when we all wrote letters and sent them in the mail. She'd say, "Oh, I'm going to get a letter from so and so today or tomorrow," and then she would. And at the time, I thought she was doing magic, but I think it was pattern recognition in terms of she was subconsciously recognizing about how often that person would write to her. So I think that's one of the biggest strengths. Also, I think perseverance. With an autistic person, a lot of times, if there's something you want to do, especially something you have a special interest in, you'll hang on for dear life. And in my case, one of my special interests was getting a PhD, and doctoral programs are really hard. So the autism sort of gave me the strength to persevere that. Challenges, some of the challenges to having autism for me are that the world is not built for people with sensory sensitivity. And so, for example, every time I go to a doctor's office, at least my doctor's, there's a TV in the corner because I guess neurotypical people are bored, want to watch something while we're waiting for the doctor. And I find this utterly terrible, especially if it's turned to soap operas. The best case scenario is it's turned to that health channel where there's somebody on there talking about how to get your blood pressure checked. But a lot of times it's doing this soaps or, some kind of, once I took my kids to the doctor and it was doing some kind of, supernatural show. And I've got just sort of no control over the way that batters in on my senses and on my emotions. I'm like, I'm just at the allergist. I didn't sign up to have nightmares because you're showing supernatural. So one of the most challenging things to being autistic at my age is the constant amount of energy that I spend on sensory things that may or may not even be noticed by other people, but that are assaulting me in every situation. Faith. So my faith has been sustaining, but also something that there's been some issues around because I grew up in a tradition where it was expected that you would have a really emotional approach to faith, and I didn't. And so I constantly felt like that was something wrong with my spiritual growth. And now I understand that I'm autistic. I'm not going to have the expected emotions at the expected times. If I have emotions, I'm not going to be able to label them. I'm not going to be able to know exactly what they are. I'm not going to respond to things in the way that was expected to respond to. And that doesn't mean that I don't believe in the creeds and that I don't believe in the scriptures and that I don't believe that, that Jesus is real and that I can have a relationship with him. It just means that I don't really have that relationship emotionally. But one of the things that has been more sustaining is as I discovered more liturgical aspects of faith. A lot of autistic people who are religious love liturgical traditions because the same thing happens every week. And so it's very predictable. I'm Episcopalian. I know that there will be the Book of Common Prayer, that we will say these prayers, that I will hear three scriptures readings and a psalm, that there will be communion. We do communion in a very predefined way. So discovering the fact that there was a tradition out there that would, sort of allow me to come into it with my Christian beliefs, but not expect me to have certain emotions as long as I followed the procedures. That gets a lot of times people like, oh, no, that's not real faith. Well, for an autistic person, I think that kind of faith is a godsend, the kind of faith that says, you know what, you're not saved through following the procedures, you're saved by Jesus, but you can experience faith through following predefined procedures, and that is okay, and people will not, get upset at you for it or say that you aren't really a Christian because you're not having the right kind of emotions. So my relationship to faith as an autistic person is complicated in all those ways.
I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos. Here's one person's experience being autistic.
My name is Glenn Williams. I'm 58 years old and I was diagnosed with autism in 2017. It really wasn't that hard to get diagnosed. I just went to my general practitioner and he recommended a doctor who spent an hour and a half with me, and he gave me some tests and talked to me. And at the end, he said, "Yes, sir, you have autism." Having autism, some people might notice that I have trouble sometimes looking directly into people's eyes, making eye contact. Also, what people say is my face may lack affect, or I might seem emotionless. But of course, this isn't true. It's just not showing on my face. But things that people don't notice is how my brain works. I'm a very eclectic thinker. So if I'm talking with someone, I am listening, but I'm thinking of a lot of different things that are related to what they're saying at the same time. Even though I have a service dog, a lot of people don't think that I'm autistic when they see me because I'm not flapping my hands or spinning or talking to myself, but it is pretty pervasive thing. Autism for me has been a strength because of the eclectic thinking. I'm a very good troubleshooter. And so, whereas others might have a tendency to focus or to hyper focus on just a certain area, I'm very good at taking a lot of steps back and sort of looking at a lot of aspects of a system and kind of seeing how they all interrelate. And I'm very, of course, with attention to detail, I'm very good at finding things in a system that aren't right, and they often lead to a problem. So that's been a blessing throughout my life that I have that skill. Something that's challenging with autism is sometimes an autistic person may feel lonely, and it's because of our social deficit, and we don't speak the same kind of hidden language that the rest of the world does all the time. And so the nonverbal things especially are hard for us to kind of figure out. And so the kind of the dance of, social interaction sometimes is hard for us to figure out and do successfully or very successfully. And so sometimes it can be lonely. But overall, I can say too that having had a relationship with God, what I can say is that at the beginning, I began to just feel like I just didn't fit in and that I tried to be like everybody else. And then having a relationship with Christ, I know that what I need to do is just to accept who I am, embrace who I am, and rejoice in who I am. Stop trying to be like everyone else and be the best person that I can be, that God intended for me to be. And when I do that, then I find that He can use me to make differences in the world and to encourage others in ways that I just can't even, sometimes imagine or believe how it happens. But so I'm in a better place now after all these years. And I just am happy to be who I am and serving the Lord.
I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and/or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos.
My name is Stephen Bedard. I'm currently 55 years old, and I was diagnosed at around the age of 45, although there were plenty of suspicions before that time. My two biological children both have autism, and I had recognized some similarities between my children and myself. I would say that the process of getting diagnosed was relatively easy. As I've said, my wife and I had suspected that I was autistic for some time. I was not sure how to go about getting a diagnosis, as my children had been diagnosed by a developmental pediatrician before the age of 3. So, during a regular appointment with my family doctor, I asked how I should do this. Fortunately, his clinic had a partnership with a psychologist's office, and he made a referral. I met with a psychologist associate on a number of occasions, doing tests and surveys, and a survey was given to my wife as well. After consulting with the psychologist associate met with me again and informed me that it was a clear case of autism. I'm thankful that because it was referred by my doctor and I was in Canada, that the diagnosis was free. I know a number of people, including Canadians, who are unable to get a diagnosis because of the cost. I'm still processing this diagnosis. In the early years, I still had moments of doubting whether or not I was really autistic. I've since become much more comfortable with my autistic identity. Before moving on, I'd like to say that when I told my nonverbal autistic son that I also had been diagnosed with autism, he shook my hand as if welcoming me to the club. If you met me, would you know that I was autistic? I suppose other autistic people would. My most obvious traits include my facial expressions. I usually have a very deadpan expression, even when telling a joke. I'm socially awkward and I do not make friends easily. People might also recognize that when I'm interested in something, I go all out. For example, I'm interested in school and have 5 university degrees and would do more if I had the time and money. P.S. I am seriously considering one more. One of the autistic traits that people might not notice is my slow processing. It takes me a while to process things, but I'm able to camouflage it in a way that most people do not notice. I also struggle with executive functioning. Some might notice a lack of organization, but executive functioning is deeper than that, and only recently am I recognizing how it has affected me. By the way, I do stim, but only in front of my wife and only in the most stressful of times. Some people might doubt I have autism because I'm a pastor, and being a pastor would require skills that many people doubt are consistent with autism. I'm also married with children, something that some do not expect of people with autism. My autism is a strength in that I tend to look for patterns in anything I encounter. This allows me to find connections that might not be apparent to everyone, or at least not as quickly. Also, when I'm interested in something, I tend to go all in. When this overlaps with aspects of my occupations, this can be a tremendous advantage. For example, the Second World War has long been one of my special interests. As a military chaplain, this can be helpful as military history often comes up in conversation at my unit. It does not come across as imposing my interest because it's frequently brought up within the military context. While in general I find my autism to be a good thing, there are times that it can be challenging. One of the challenges is in the area of empathy. The stereotype is that autistic people lack empathy. This is a myth. Autistic people may experience empathy in some different ways from neurotypicals. But for myself, I find myself to be hyper empathetic, meaning that I take on other people's emotions in such an intense way that I need time to recover afterward. I should mention that I first recognized this after observing the same phenomena in my autistic children. As I look back to my diagnosis and my life since then, I can recognize how my faith has sustained me through this. I am sure there are some people who see autism as a curse and they wonder why God would make them that way. For myself, I see neurodiversity as a part of God's beautiful creation. When I look at Paul's picture of the church as a body in 1 Corinthians 12, I see the promotion of unity with diversity rather than uniformity. Autism is not a glitch in God's creation, but rather a part of a planned diversity that makes everything work better. Having said that, I do acknowledge that there are challenges in autism, both for myself and my children. I believe in those moments when we feel the least in control that we can rely upon God to sustain. Not that God necessarily changes our circumstances immediately, but that God gives us glimpses of grace in the midst of the challenges. Looking back, I'm thankful that God has created me this way, and I attempt to trust in God's strength for whatever comes my way.
I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and/or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos. The following interviews from other sources is with Dr. Hugh Ross. It provides some details about what life was like growing up autistic, but not yet being diagnosed. Dr. Ross is now a successful scientist in the field of astrophysics and founder and senior scholar at Reasons to Believe.
Well, like most people on the autistic spectrum, I was verbally handicapped, apparently, but it's apparent. My mother would say, yeah, Hugh only has 3 words, yes, no, and cookie. And you can get pretty far with those 3 words.
Cookie's good, yes.
But what I learned was if I did speak, I would get into trouble because people on the spectrum tend to be really blunt and honest. And so I got reprimanded for saying, oh, look at that lady, she's really fat.
Yeah.
Or that man's really dirty.
Yeah.
And so I basically said, if I'm going to stay out of trouble, I got to keep my mouth shut. Also, because I was quiet, all of my parents' friends in Montreal, where I spent my first 4 years, insisted that I was mentally handicapped and that I needed to be put into an institution. My parents, I could hear them saying, they defended me and basically said, no, we've seen what he does. Have you ever watched him play? He's not mentally handicapped. But growing up in Vancouver, I was in school, I wasn't speaking, and also I had dexterity problems. I couldn't make a pencil make numbers and letters. So in grade 1, I was failing in all the subjects. And looks like I was going to have to repeat grade 1. But 6 weeks before the end of the school year, our parents moved from a small rented house into a condemned home that they were going to rebuild. So I had this grade 1 teacher, Lila Campbell, for just 6 weeks. Somehow she saw the frustration on my face and said, stay after school, I want to ask you some questions. And she had about 30 books on her desk, and she asked me questions about those books. She figured out that even though I wasn't speaking, that I was reading. I'd read the books, I gave the correct answers. So she said, look, I know you're failing in all your subjects, but I'm going to try to get you into grade 2. So she went to bat for me with the principal, and I got into grade 2. But here I am in grade 2, and at that time in Canada, your seating in the class depended on your academic standing. I was in the last chair. And even though the teacher never made it clear, all the students knew. And so I got teased all the time for being the class dummy. But I said, okay, I'm going to have to talk. No matter how much trouble I get into, I'm going to start talking. And between grade 1 and grade 2, my parents said that I was obsessive. I was spending hours a day practicing how to make a pencil, make numbers and letters. But when I entered grade 2, I could make the pencil do what I needed it to do. And so there'd be a set of tests every few weeks. Every few weeks I'd move up a few chairs. And by the end of grade 2, I was in the first chair.
Wow. Yeah.
So what I could say to parents who have children on the spectrum, they have a special gift. Help them find that gift. In my case, I kind of found it on my own. I went to the library and I said, oh, I just love physics and astronomy. And what I share with parents who have children that are on the spectrum, expose them to material that's 8 or 9 grade levels above where they are and see what grabs their attention. And typically, give them, say, freshman college texts. And the one thing you can do is kind of put lines around a paragraph that you know they're going to be able to comprehend and see their eyes go to the more complicated material. That's your clue. And then if that's all they want to study, and that's typical of people on the spectrum, they kind of get locked in to just one subject, then you can encourage that. So
Great advice.
and then
You suppose you chose to be proactive rather than reactive. I mean, you could have done what a lot of kids on the spectrum do, is just basically retreat and form a shell and never come out.
Well, I did some of that. My parents were worried that I just spent all my time in my room, and we had one book, and I was reading that one book. But when I was in grade 2, our teacher took us to the public library. And so I would actually get bus fare from my parents, and every Saturday I would go to the Vancouver Public Library and come home with 5 books on astronomy and physics. So
really,
yeah, and every week I would read 5 books on those subject matter.
At this point?
I was 7.
7. You're reading astronomy and physics.
Correct.
Did your parents clue in? This kid is brilliant.
They told me they knew I was brilliant from the time I was 2 years of age, because they said they watched me doing science experiments without any motivation starting at age 2.
At age 2?
At age 2. And so they said, and I wasn't talking, but they said, we know something's going on there. A number of my friends are saying, Hugh, you need to consider the fact that you're either autistic or you've got Asperger's. And at first I said, nah, it can't be. You know, I don't see that. But, you know, I had enough people saying that to me, especially my wife said it to me. I said, you know what, I'm going to start taking the tests. And what I discovered is if you go online, there's like 16, 20 different tests you can take. So I decided to just take all the tests. But I also thought it would be important to have that confirmed. So I asked my friends and my wife to take those tests as if they were me. And so I want to make sure we were being objective about this, because it'd be easy for me to read things in there. And so I looked at the way they would evaluate me on the tests and the way I evaluated myself on the tests. And it was encouraging that there was consensus. So I was trying to be careful not to allow my own personal biases get in the way. But the fact that my friends and myself all came up with the same conclusion, that I either had severe Asperger's or mild autism, somewhere in that line.
I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and/or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos.
My name's Ron Sandison. My current age is 49 years old, and I'll be 50 on May 10th, then I'll be over the hill. And I was diagnosed with autism in 1982 at age 7. And when I was diagnosed, only 1 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. Now it's 1 in every 36 children will be diagnosed with autism. And the process that led to my diagnosis with autism is my development. It began normal. I was able to say my first word, mommy, at 9 months. And then at 18 months, I went from being able to saying mommy to only mom, mom. And my mom knew there was something drastically different between my brother Steve and Chucky, who were older than me, and me. And she took me to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, men are like fine wine, you got to give them time. And my mom knew that time was the essence. She immediately got me intense speech therapy. I was in intense speech therapy all the way from age 2 to age 16. And when I was 7 years old, my speech was so delayed, my brother Chuck would introduce me to people saying, you need to meet my brother Ron, I think he's from Norway. And no one was able to understand my language because it was so delayed except for my immediate family. And when I was 7 years old, my mom took me to Henry Ford Hospital when the school specialist wanted to diagnose me as emotionally impaired. And in 1982, I was diagnosed with autism. And when I was diagnosed, the school specialists and experts said that if I had autism, I'd never read beyond the 7th grade level, never attend college, never have meaningful relationships, and never excel in sports. And my mom, being a great mom, was determined to prove the experts wrong. She quit her job as an art teacher and became a full-time Ron teacher. And working with me and developing my skills, I've been able to go to college, get married, have a daughter who's 8 years old, and have success in life. The process for me was pretty easy. I was 7 years old. My mom took me to the specialist to get diagnosed. So it wasn't really a hard process since I was diagnosed early in life. Some of my autistic traits is I sometimes stem. I love wearing a ring that goes in a circle so I can move my ring in a circle and stem. One of my autistic quirks that stands out is my special interest in animals. I have a prairie dog that when I was as a young child, all the way from age 7 to age 16, I carried that prairie dog everywhere. And even now, whenever I go and speak places, I bring my prairie dog and I bring my honey badger. And those are kind of my special interest. So some of the traits people may not notice with me is my sensory overload. I've learned ways to being able to have coping skills to deal with them. But one of the things I hate that someone might not notice is a change in my routine. Whether it's a change in not being able to do something at a certain time, or when at work they change my work schedule. I really don't like that. And I don't like a change in my environment, moving to a new place or getting a new area work assignment at work. And at work I always follow the same routine. I do 2 groups every day when I work at the hospital. I also do my rounds at the same time each day. And when I take the patients for lunch, I always take them for lunch and then stay back for dinner and get everything ready for group. So some people may not notice that I have to have a routine. That's a big part of my autistic traits that don't stand out. And some people might not think I'm autistic for these reasons. Number one, I've had the same job working at the hospital, Havenwick Hospital, for 16 years. Number two, I speak at 70 events a year on autism in large crowds. So people may say, look at how successful he is. I also have a Master of Divinity, graduating with 4.0. I also work as a professor part-time at Destiny School of Ministry. And people may see those things and say, well, he's married, he has a child, he works full-time, he's gainfully employed. Those aren't the types of things we think of when we think of autism. And my autism strength is this, my amazing memory ability. I can quote word perfect or 15,000 Bible verses, including 22 books of the New Testament. I can also, with my autistic quirks, I'm able to translate most Bible verses in my head that I have memorized from Greek into English. And I've translated 2/3 of the New Testament from Greek into English. I've also never missed a day of work. So those are some of the gifts that autism's given me. I've also, since 2015, spoken live to over 250,000 people. I also have 3 traditionally published books. My first book, A Parent's Guide to Autism, Practical Advice, Biblical Wisdom, published by Charisma House, was a top-selling Christian book on autism all time for parenting. And my challenges with autism, one of them is sensory issues. I hate boom, boom. There's a song, it's all about the bass. You give me bass, I'm going to give you a can, a kick. Well, you can fill in the blank. I do not like loud noises. I also do not like things like nail polish. My wife, when she uses nail polish, she has to go outside. I hate the smell of nail polish. My faith is very important to me. I'm a licensed Assemblies of God minister, and I'm the first autistic licensed Assemblies of God minister. And 2 Corinthians says it best. We have these treasures in jars of clay, so this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. And autism has given me the ability to memorize vast amounts of scripture and also to connect with God. In my weakness, his power is made perfect, 2 Corinthians 12:9. And my mom prayed that the Holy Spirit would show her how to educate me and develop my gifts. She was inspired by Proverbs 22:29. Do you see a man or woman skilled in their labor? They will serve before kings and not obscure men. And my faith is very important to me. One of the ways autism helps me with my faith is memorizing the Bible. I spend 2 hours every day that I have off memorizing new Bible verses. And when I do rounds, I always have on note cards Bible verses, and I'm memorizing new verses every few days. And my favorite verse, in fact, has to do with autism. Psalms 84:11-12 says, "For the Lord God is sun and shield, the Lord bestows favor and honor, and no good thing does he withhold from those whose walk is blameless. O Lord Almighty, bless the man who trusts in you." And a delay does not mean a denial with autism. In that verse it says, no good thing does God withhold from those whose walk is blameless. And we're not blameless, but in Christ we are blameless because he's taken up our sin. And a lot of times people hear the word autism and they think of things that people may miss out on. Being invited to birthday parties, being able to drive, being able to have a career. But I'm here to say, as an adult with autism, is that God has provided all my needs according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. And he hasn't withheld anything. And he's been a son to me, provider. He's been a shield to me, a protector. And as I trust in him, as I learn social skills, God opens up doors beyond anything I could ever imagine. And I want to encourage you, if you're on the autism spectrum and you're an adult, that there's hope. That God has people. You need a support team. People understand autism and can teach you those social skills, who can teach you how to connect with your coworkers in the workplace, and also how to be able to enjoy a high quality of life. Right now in the United States, less than 20% of adults with autism are gainfully employed. Right now in the United States, the average life expectancy is 54 years old. But with the right resources, the right support team, we can thrive on the spectrum. In my 4th book, Adulting on the Spectrum, An Insider's Guide for Navigating Life with Autism, will be out in March. And I want to encourage you, read resources on autism. Thanks so much.
I'm William O'Flaherty. Thanks for visiting my channel. Please consider liking and or sharing this video. Also, feel free to comment and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and watch other videos.